Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. So, welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. And today I'm here with my friend, peer, and colleague, Vania Phitidis, who is a compassionate advocate for body acceptance and intuitive eating. And she is guiding clients to break free from damaging cultural ideals around weight and beauty. With expertise in psychology, mindfulness-based eating awareness, and self-esteem mentoring, she helps individuals reconnect with their bodies, cultivate self-compassion, and embrace their unique power. Drawing from her personal journey and professional training, Vania fosters the world where kindness, equality, and authenticity thrive, empowering clients to create lasting change in their relationship with food, themselves, and life. So I am so honored and grateful to have you here, Vania, and that we are connected as friends and peers over the last number of years as well. So thank you for being here.
Lovely to be here, Lynn. I'm really thrilled.
Yeah, and I mean, we know each other some bit in a way, and I was thinking about this, like, I suppose this is what I really like with social media, the internet, and stuff, that you have this opportunity to connect with like-minded colleagues, people, friends, peers that you would not have met otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be a connecting space in which, as you say, connections you wouldn't have made are made. But we've met in person, so that's also, but first through social media, then in person. And then we've
Yeah,
maintained contact. So yeah, I
yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah, and I think that particular piece as well of taking an online connection and then having the opportunity to meet in person, it's just like the sort of the really specialness of doing it, I think. And I've had the opportunity to do that several times with people. So yeah, but we're here, and I know you have decades of experience in this field. And the topic of conversation that I really wanted to talk with you about is kind of around that maybe more grayer, messier space in that we call chronic dieting. And I suppose talking about defining that term, who might identify with that, who might actually listen to this conversation or something and kind of go, oh, that's me. I just thought this was a me problem. Because we talk about eating disorders and eating disorder recovery, but I think there's still a lot of stereotyping around that and who that is, and also that it's quite extreme and there's diagnostic criteria and all of this stuff. But it doesn't mean that people who don't meet those but are sort of a little bit like side of that also struggle and also suffer a lot. But it doesn't feel recognized, I think, in the same way. And
No.
I think there's a lot of people who fall into that space who, I suppose, what I really want is for people to know that there are other options than what they've been
Yeah.
presented with, or what we think that is our only option, which is dieting. So,
Yeah.
but before we go into that, I suppose, just kind of, I'm always curious, like, what brought you to work as a coach in this particular space?
Well, it really comes from my own life experience. I grew up in a family of dieters, and I don't remember a time where food was not a thing, or weight or body shape or appearance was not a thing. I don't remember a time of that kind of innocence in my own body or with food. I have it now, but I didn't have a kind of memory of that to draw back on, because my mum and my sister were always on diets, and they would have the chart up in the bathroom with the weight, the sort of what their goal was and the daily things, and they'd track it and weigh themselves. And I grew up, my sister's 8 years older than me. So from very young, I was sort of schooled into this. I remember when I don't know how old I was, I'm sure under 10, we were having a roast dinner and I put gravy on my peas. And my dad said to me, "Oh, you shouldn't put gravy on your peas. That's fattening." So, you know, uh, this was just part of the family culture. And by the time I was 13, I had a dental situation where I had something went wrong anyway. I won't go into the gory details, but I lost a lot of weight because I couldn't eat. And I started to then get a lot of positive comments about my body. So there I was on antibiotics because I was very ill from the infection in my mouth. And people were telling me how wonderful I looked, how great I looked. And it's just such a contradiction, isn't it? You actually quite
Yeah.
ill, and then everyone's telling you how great you look. It's like you look so well, you look so healthy. It's like what? um, and then that really exacerbated the eating disorder behaviors. So I've kind of been everywhere on the spectrum when it comes to this relationship with food, from eating disorder into disordered eating, chronic dieting. And we can talk about that more because it went from, I was never diagnosed as anorexic, but I can tell you my behaviors were
Hmm.
anorexic behaviors. And then that turned into bulimic behaviors because as soon as I started to gain the weight and I wasn't able to not eat anymore, I would throw it up. So
Yeah.
that went on for a few years. And then I eventually got some, not really some help, but it was supposed to be help, but it wasn't helpful. Where I went to see a psychologist who eventually, when I managed to get the words out and tell the guy, he called my mother in straight away with no preparation. He was not trained in eating disorders, but he told me this is life threatening and you're a minor. I need to get your mother in when she collects you. So I just promised my mum I would stop doing it. And that was that. Never went back to therapy. And I was never asked about it again, you know, and the behavior did stop, but then launched into the chronic dieting, disordered eating pathway. That was all peppered in between anyway, but it was, and what you were saying about how it's not really recognized is because our culture not only supports it, but recommends it. It's just
Yes.
everywhere. And so you're seen to be a good person if you are controlling your weight or attempting to control your weight. And if you are on a, healthy eating kick or, all of these things, it's just like you can barely look at the headlines in the news from day to day without there being a few things a week, probably, about the big scary the fear mongering messages around our health and its supposed connection to weight, etc. So, yeah, so that's my background, and it was
Yeah.
only when I was, oh gosh, in my 40s when I'd been on a really strict diet and I'd lost so much weight, I'd lost my period. And this is one where they take a blood test and they tell you, oh, this is going to rebalance your hormones. And you mustn't eat red peppers because those are too high in sugar, but you can eat green peppers as long as you only eat this much of green peppers. And you couldn't eat carrots because those are too high in sugar. And, that kind of very, very
Yeah.
restrictive diet. And I lost my period and my hair started to fall out. But of course, everyone was telling me how great I looked.
Oh, goodness.
And then what was interesting was the moment that diet came to an end, my kind of official relationship with the person who I'd paid a ton of money to fix me forever, I just went out of control with the eating. It was like I reached this low weight, and then like from the next day, it started to climb up and up and up because I just couldn't stop eating. And the sugar, more sugary it was, the better. And the more high carb it was, the better. And I felt like I didn't even know myself. It was like, I don't know who this person is. It's like, there was nothing I felt helpless. It was like, it wasn't, I know people say it's in your control, but I can tell you, it really didn't feel like it was in my control.
Yeah.
And lots of my
But
clients say that to me as well.
I wonder as well because you came off such a restrictive diet that it's in that phase of like the body taking over
Yes.
to rehabilitate with the nutrition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The body will go where it needs to go for its survival. It will do what it
Yeah.
needs to do if the food is available.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then came at a point where I'd done a master's degree in a completely different topic, which was more about sustainability in the sustainability field. And that came almost at the point at which there was the financial crash.
Okay.
And my aim was to work with businesses to help change minds and attitudes around sustainability rather than the more technical stuff around sustainability. I'm interested in behavior change and what
Yeah.
happens inside us in order to shift our behavior for things that are better for ourselves, better for the planet, etc. And anyway, it just wasn't going to happen. You know, with the financial crash, sustainability was kind of off the table, and those kind of what they call soft skills
Mm.
of, your attitudes, your values, your processing in your own mind, etc., etc. The training budgets for those sorts of things went out the window. So then it was like, okay, I need to pivot here. Now what am I going to do? And that came at a point where I had really understood what was happening for me in terms of dieting, and that dieting was actually the problem. And so I pivoted and then started training in intuitive eating and mindful eating, and so yeah, that's how I got into this. The long story.
That's the long story. And I mean, when I'm listening to your story, I think what struck me was that, like, that there was no experience of a good relationship with food growing up or
Mm-hmm.
mirrored in anything. So there was nothing there to kind of, like you said, fall back on or to
Mm-hmm.
anchor into,
Mm-hmm.
which creates its own sort of dynamic. And I don't think that's particularly uncommon either. And I'm sure you've
No.
heard lots of those stories too.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that you were in your 40s before this kind of clicked together that it's not working, or that your body actually finally got to that point. I've had enough. I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking over here. I'm not doing any more of this because I want us to stay alive, and I'm just not interested in any more
Mm-hmm.
serious restrictive kind of eating or under eating or undernourishment. So because that feels quite like late in some ways. And also, I suppose that's part of the conversation here. I think that it isn't uncommon because when I work with people who are in their early 20s, maybe, who've been doing this cycle for, I don't know, maybe up to from teens, maybe, or even slightly younger, depending, but they're 4 or 5 years into it and they're like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And then, you share with them, it's like, it's so great you're here and that you're,
Mm-hmm.
taking this step and having the courage to decide, I don't want this for myself anymore. Because I work with people who are 40 and 50 and even into their 60s who've been doing this for 20, 30 years. And like their
Mm-hmm.
eyes almost fall out of the heads because it's like, what do you mean? How could you do this for 20, 30 or more years? It's like, I just want to be done with it like now.
I know, I know. I just got a new client who's 20, mid 20s, and I said that exact same thing to her. I'm so glad you're here because you've got a whole life ahead of you, free from this stuff. It's
Yeah.
just, and yeah, I think what's made a big difference is the internet.
Mm,
So there's so much more information available. And even though there's a lot of very harmful messages going out, you've got people like Jamila Jamil, and, you've got lots of advocates for body liberation and freedom in our own skins, regardless of our gender, our sexuality, our skin color, our, you know, bodily components, what we look like, etc., which wasn't around when I was, until my early or late 30s, really. I mean, the internet was just kind of getting going. And I lived
Yeah.
in South Africa as well. So that's a bit, a bit delayed in terms of the technology and all of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's made a big difference both ways, but there's more help readily available, I
I
think.
think so. Yeah, I agree. And it's particular for that age group, it feels like they have they're able to see the options sooner because
Hmm.
it is there now. And this was we just want to put that out there. It's never too late. Like with you and
No.
I hear colleagues who work with people in their 70s. It's like it's
Hmm.
never too late to start. And the sooner, if you're younger, the more of your life you might get back. But it's never
Yeah.
too late if you're 40 or 50 or even in your 60s, listen to it and kind of go, I don't want to be that old lady in the nursing home say, I can't eat this dessert because it's too high in
Yeah.
sugar or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's never too late. And like the sooner you reclaim it, the more life you have left free
Yeah.
of it, I
Yeah.
think.
What I don't want on my tombstone, if I have one, is she reached her goal weight, as if that was my goal in life, that by the
Yeah,
time I die, I weigh such and such. I mean, you know, life is, there's more to
I
life.
I know. And I had a career highlight actually this year with one of my clients who sent me a video of throwing her scales in the bin. And I said to her, we're kind of finished up now. And I said, oh, that was like one of my career highlights to have somebody send me a video of that. And and this particular person said at some point in our work together that she said, this is ridiculous. This whole weighing oneself. It's like, it's actually absurd. And the only
Mhm.
time we should be weighing flesh is when you go to the butcher and buy a piece of meat, for your barbecue or your Sunday roast or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's actually really absurd when you think about it. And that this kind of like the last 5 pounds,
Mm.
it's also a kind of a very absurd statement. Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, or
Last
any
of what?
pounds. Yeah, it's like, what does it mean? What meanings do we place on it?
Yeah. So tell me then, so like you have been on the spectrum, and I think this is quite common too, that things shape shift, and until we reach a place where either the body says no, or something happens, or we find more information that we're kind of done with this. But like this term, chronic dieting, I suppose I wonder if we could, like, how would you define that, or if you use it in your marketing or in conversation, how would you? How would you define that?
I would define it as an ongoing, it's like if you think about waves, it's like this
Mm-hmm.
ongoing thing. You're on a diet, then you go off the diet, then you go on the diet, then you go off the diet, and it's just this kind of revolving door kind of idea of, and then you're researching a different one, and you're trying something else, and what tends to happen is the person regains the weight, often to a higher weight than they were to begin with. And then when they get to that certain point, or some people have a kind of what they call a cutoff, where they just go, okay, when these clothes don't fit me, or when I reach that on the scale, that's, and it's almost like a lifestyle.
Mm.
But also what I've noticed, I don't know if you see this, is a lot of people these days, or a lot of people are coming to me these days, aren't doing what I did, where they're actually following a program. It's more like a chronic restriction
Mm.
cycle, chronic restriction cycle. So it's not like I know we can call it a diet, but when growing up, and until all the time that I was on diets, they're actually programs of other people that I've read, and I'm following this much of this and that much of that. Or it's more like cut out this completely and no refined sugars. So it's everything else is fine, but it's not any of this kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say chronic dieting is there's a pattern that's just like a revolving thing that continues to go on for years and years and years.
Yeah, I think what you said there, the that I've heard that like the cutoff point, and this could be in general conversations with people that you don't necessarily like even think they have a problem with food or they think they have a problem with food, but it's this kind of they weigh themselves just, if I don't weigh myself, like I can't keep myself in check. And
Mhm.
this kind of key, and sort of I can branch out a bit here, but then I'm weigh myself, maybe not religiously, not in the sense that, somebody's getting on the scales twice a day but
Mm.
just kind of, or like the clothes don't fit, so I'll cut back.
Mhm.
But I think that the thing you said there as well, that yeah, like when I was in my 20s and I know I had a stack of diet books, and it was like Monday this is for breakfast, and then you're trying to stick,
Mhm.
and I could never stick to it because I couldn't actually cope with a different breakfast every day. I eat mostly the same things. Like I eat the breakfast, the same breakfast for weeks and weeks. So it
Mhm.
was just too much work to have a different breakfast every day. So even the plan was gone, it's 2 days into it anyway. But
Oh,
this
I think
kind
I'm a
of,
much more compliant person than you. I was such a good dieter.
I, I think I was never actually a good dieter, I think. Apart from a few different things, but then my body seems to, I don't know. I think my metabolism changes on its own accord in different seasons of my life, depending
Mhm.
on other things, activity levels,
Mhm.
regardless of what I was eating. So I think I was just like I'm thinking about my early 20s now in particular, where my weight would have fluctuated, and sometimes I was eating kind of similar to when I was maybe weighing more, and then I was weighing less. So like it was all quite messed up,
Yeah,
really, and
confusing. It doesn't fit with the narrative of what dieting does it? It's like the whole dieting narrative is quite mathematical, and our
yes,
bodies are not mathematical in that way. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on there that we don't even understand fully. And when I say we, I'm not talking about me because I understand very little scientifically, but the people who should know or who
yeah,
dedicate their lives to that don't even
yeah.
understand how everything fits together completely as a whole.
No, our bodies are just like they're not Bunsen burners, which is how I
No,
understand that how calories are calculated. You burn a food and you calculate the amount of energy released from that. But our bodies don't work like that. And
no.
even people can eat very little food and they can still gain weight
Hmm.
because the body is responding. And I believe that our bodies are innately wise, and their biggest job is to try to keep us alive at all costs. So
Hmm.
that is, they do whatever they need
Yeah.
to do with that. And I suppose, the people who come and reach out to work with you,
Mm.
say you've been on this diet cycling wave for a few decades even. Where do you think it's like, or what is the pattern that you see where people kind of arrive that I can't do this anymore?
Mm.
Like what sort of, how does that tend to sort of present itself, or like when people come and they reach out for a discovery call, like where are they then?
Most people are at their wits' end. Um, they realize that they've become obsessed. They realize that their thoughts about food and their bodies take up a lot of space. They go to bed at night upset with themselves, vowing to be better the next day, planning what they're going to have the next day. And when they wake up, often it's with dread because they don't know how their day is going to go with food. One client recently told me that she had a really important business meeting that she was driving to, and she really needed to kind of prepare herself mentally for it and sort of get her thoughts in order and kind of regulate her nervous system and just kind of be in this calm state and kind of just be prepared. And the entire drive to the meeting, she was worried about how she looked, whether her clothes were appropriate and fitting her well enough for the meeting, whether she looked fat in her clothes. And that was quite a defining moment for her to just realize, what the hell? There's something wrong here. This shouldn't be where my head is. You know, she's
Mm.
a businesswoman, you know, runs her own business. Um, she's got a lot of responsibility in her business and, you know, and for this to be what is occupying her, and was like, it wasn't anything she could even help. Even though she was aware of it, she couldn't kind of refocus and put herself on a different track.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing. It's just the recognition that I think it's that the restriction and the dieting pattern isn't working. But the thing is, though, I don't know that you find this for yourself, but a lot of people come to me recognizing that dieting doesn't work, or restriction doesn't work, whatever, and they want another way to control their weight.
Yes. Yeah, because that's the other thing that I feel I'm thinking about a couple of people I talked with recently, or quite often it's like actually it's across the spectrum, really. Depending on the person's body size. Most people are either terrified of gaining weight or want another way, or I don't want to diet anymore, but I just cannot stand my body being in this size or this weight, or
Mm-hmm.
particularly if it's changed recently. And it's that double bind.
It is a double bind. Or I realized that dieting, you know, doesn't work, but I need to lose weight for my health. You know, it's
Yes.
impacting my health, or I'm really uncomfortable, or, you know, I'm physically uncomfortable, so I need to lose weight so that I can. You know, it's not often, it's not all the time, but often it's people say, I don't really care, you know, about wearing a certain size or looking a certain way. That doesn't really matter to me as much as being more mobile and being more, you know, and bringing down my blood pressure and bringing down my blood sugars and just being healthier. So, but it's kind of a spectrum
Yeah.
from, uh, but it's all centered around weight control,
I
whatever the
agree.
reason.
And that's, you said that thing as well. I just want to be, I'm so uncomfortable. I'm so uncomfortable. And I don't want to be uncomfortable anymore. And I think I just want to say something to that here, sharing an experience that my client shared with me, that we've been working together for a good while. And that she said, this is a person in a bigger body, but she said, when I, she said, I feel good in my body now, and the weight didn't change. Like, other
Mm-hmm.
things have changed, and how she's taken care of her body has
Mm-hmm.
dramatically changed, and her attitude towards it. And then she also said, and she said, well, I notice when I feel good in my body, I'm much happier. Like when I look at myself, and I'm more confident, and I'm just actually, I think I look quite good actually, And it's just, and I said to her, it's like, I wish we could just bottle that up and we could just sell it. And then it just like probably be out of a job in a short while, but that would be wonderful. And somebody else recently kind of voiced something very similar, where she noticed, when I don't feel bloated and uncomfortable, my body feels different. So
Mm-hmm.
even though the weight, and this is also somebody in a bigger body, like all of that hasn't changed, but
Mm-hmm.
because the body physical discomfort from like being bloated or in pain, like that isn't there,
Mm-hmm.
um I just feel more comfortable, and
Yep.
I make different choices. And it's difficult to, I think it's almost like it's something that has to be experienced to be believed that that is
Mm-hmm.
possible. But hearing that from people, and particular people who've been on that long, lengthy on and off diet journey, and they just kind of go, actually, it wasn't about size. It was about me finding ways to feel comfortable in my body that
Mm.
really had nothing to do with losing weight in the end of the day.
Yeah, I think there's so much internal work that we can do to get to a place of self-acceptance. The thing is, though, we've got a world out there that is anti-fat, and we are interacting with the world around us all the time, and so it's unfortunately not a once and done job, I don't think,
Mm-mm.
because we're continuously exposed to these messages that fatness is bad and unhealthy, that there are all these character flaws in quotation marks associated with fatness, and it requires building skills to meet that when it comes our way,
Yeah.
so that we don't get derailed back into a unharmonious relationship with food and our own bodies, and start working against ourselves rather than with ourselves.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of particular then if you're living in a body that doesn't meet societal's beauty expectation standards of beauty and expectations of what health looks like in quotation marks,
Mm,
all of that. I think it's it is much harder um than if somebody is living in a body that, you know, is more in the sort of standard range where you will experience much, much less external weight stigma.
hmm.
It's more internalized.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, that makes it different. And I also feel like even people who are recovering from an eating disorder, going back to what you said earlier, a lot of this stuff is so normalized in conversations and things that are applauded. And if you look, you could be sick, but if you're thin, people would comment on it and say, "Oh, you look so well." That that it just makes it, like those messages then affirm the eating disorder voice, and it's like, so
Mm,
you have to work twice as hard to try to undo or counteract that, and just do something that's just counter, like
mm,
cultural, really,
hmm, hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I think as part of that, then, and I think when we're in this dieting kind of mentality and thinking, we talk about emotional eating, and people are kind of talking about like, I have a problem with food and I just emotionally eat a lot. And like when we talk about emotional eating, like how do you define it, and what are some of the typical ways that emotional eating shows up for people?
It sounds like such a simple question. It's really not.
Mm-mm.
When clients, and myself included, when I think about, I would have called myself an emotional, look, I think we're all emotional eaters at the end of the day. We eat when we're celebrating, we eat when we're mourning, it is connected to emotion. That is just no doubt about it. So I think we need to destigmatize emotional eating, and really look at it, and really kind of unpack what actually happens with emotional eating. So this is how I kind of frame and try to understand emotional eating. When I think about the very long and very diligent dieting that I did for months on end without breaking a thing. Honestly, I was a very compliant dieter. Did I eat emotionally? Nope. Did emotions come up? Yep. How come I didn't eat emotionally then?
Mm-hmm.
How come emotional eating only showed up when I wasn't on the diet? Then,
That's interesting.
then it becomes emotional eating. It's like, well, why? So I think that there's a relationship between the dieting mentality and what we think of as emotional eating. And what I think happens is that whether we're actually dieting or not dieting, whether we are employing the dieting mentality, so that means, just for anyone who's not clear about what this means, is that we could be thinking around food and our relationship with food is black and white. This is good, that's bad. Even if we're not behaving in that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the distinction. We could be actually dieting or we could be not dieting, but we still have the dieting mentality. What you're doing is you're using your prefrontal cortex to kind of decide this is good, this is bad, I'm going to eat that, I'm not going to eat that. It's just kind of, it's under your kind of conscious cognitive control, what you're eating, what you're not eating. When emotions come that are quite strong, okay, sort of low grade emotions, not so much, but if something big comes along, what tends to happen is our prefrontal cortex goes offline temporarily. And then the control of what we're eating goes out the window because we're not used to eating with attunement,
Mm.
not used to eating without our prefrontal cortex being over involved in those decisions. And so that goes out the window. And then we're eating because we've hit the, I call it the fuck it switch, in the face of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
emotions, which is all tied up with the
Yes.
dieting mentality. So is
Hmm.
it emotional eating or is it eating in response to previous restriction in the face of or together with strong emotions that are happening at the same time?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because the way I think about it is like that it's a two-pronged approach in terms of, particularly we talk about binge eating. So there's the deprivation-driven eating,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the response to restriction, and then it's what I call like the true emotional eating, which is when we're using food as a coping mechanism, but it runs deeper, like it's where it's associated. It can be like particular foods can be associated with particular memories, or
Mm-hmm.
we're reaching for something to meet a need.
Mm-hmm.
But we cannot get to that place without first really working on the deprivational driven eating and
Yes.
then bringing that sense of curiosity into what's happening here. And when you
Mm-hmm.
do, it's really amazing to see what tends to be underneath, where people
Mm-hmm.
have like deep associations sometimes with memories or understanding, like they're using food to regulate their nervous system in different ways, or self-soothe, or it's a pleasure seeking thing because their life in general maybe is lacking in pleasure or
Mm-hmm.
sweetness,
Mm-hmm.
or but I do believe that we cannot get to that layer of nuance without sort of moving away from sort of the diet mentality where everything is black and white, or where you said like the prefrontal cortex is like over involved in the
Mm-hmm.
decision making. There's no space for being curious really about like how is this working for me, or what's underneath the behaviors, because I feel like when we're coming at it with weight loss as an outcome, as the sort of main outcome, then the behavior change you're looking at to try to do is to sort of remove, right, any of those things. Whereas when we move away from that, there's much more space to kind of get into this
Mm-hmm.
symbolism and, meeting needs and how is the food like working.
Yeah.
That there's no space for that in
No,
the
no.
type of work.
The first step is to stop dieting and to actively let go of the the pursuit of weight loss. And it's very, very hard to do in the culture that we're in. But I don't think that we can really work on emotional eating effectively, sustainably, if that is ongoing, because it is going to be interrupting um, our our ability to know whether it is deprivation related eating or whether it is genuine emotional eating. And I find that with a lot of my clients, when we've really dealt with the dieting mentality and the whole weight loss thing, emotional eating becomes like a non-event in a way. It's just, I love this new American phrase, a nothing burger. But
I never even heard that.
for some people, that isn't the case,
Yeah.
and that's okay. But then at least you know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. And I think, I don't know where I learned that, but that it's, excuse me, the deprivation driven eating has to be healed first, because otherwise, like you said, I've also seen that for some people, it's like they've been going looking for a trauma in their lives for years and years that wasn't there, but actually was the ongoing kind of
Mm-hmm.
dieting or low level under eating that was the trauma in and of itself. And then
Mm-hmm.
maybe inability to try to accept their bodies, but there
Mm-hmm.
was nothing kind of more to it than that. And
Exactly. Yes.
you know
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Exactly that.
and then with other people I've seen where you let go of some of that, other things have now space to rise to the surface, because
Mm-hmm.
again, dieting is a great distractor
Mm-hmm.
from other things when life is difficult. It's
It really is something you
you
can
know
control. Well, attempt to control anyway. Certainly takes up your time, your attention. You can plan. There's just loads you can do, as a big distraction in so many ways.
huge.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was something else I wanted to say there, but it just escaped my mind now. Yeah, it's gone. Might come
it's okay.
back.
That's okay.
So I think yeah, so I mean, this kind of comes, the conversation we had there now, to answer my next question, was really like the intersection of emotional eating and dieting.
Mm,
And I think we've already talked about that emotional eating it's not always bad. It's part of how we respond to food. And also I think sometimes it makes it, like when we talk about emotions in terms of like satisfaction and contentment and even joy or pleasure, those kind of things, eating is easier if those are present. Whereas when somebody doesn't experience those things, eating is much harder. And you still have to feed yourself because the physical
mm,
body demands food on
mm,
an ongoing, regular basis, like
yeah.
whether you feel like it or not,
Mm, mm,
you know?
mm,
Um,
yeah. So
so,
one thing that's just come to mind, Lynn, that maybe it would be useful to just bring in briefly is emotional undereating.
mm, yeah,
Um,
let's
you
talk
know,
about that.
yeah, I mean, it it's also as in a way similar to what dieting can do. It's a way to distract from feelings we don't want to feel. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot to say about it, but I just wanted to bring in that is also something that is sometimes missed. We talk, yeah,
So so what you're saying here is when somebody is maybe feeling like they're sad or overwhelmed or angry, like they don't eat, is it because the appetite
yes,
disappears, which I think can happen, or the numbing of hunger is also another great distraction that it
yes.
works
I
well.
think it works as both as a it's just for some people, but that's in my experience, and I don't have the experience of all 8 billion people on the planet, but just in my experience, um, it can be a natural appetite reduction can be a kind of natural process in the face of big emotion. That's not necessarily anything to worry about. But if it's coupled again with diet mentality and the underlying weight control issue, then it
Mm,
then it's more problematic. But it can
okay.
just be a natural thing that you're sad, you're in grief, you're whatever the feelings are, and you just don't feel like eating much. And then in a few days, that kind of rights itself again. But for people who are chronic dieters or people who are determined to be controlling their weight, or that's a sort of underlying goal, could say, then that can become a problematic thing.
Yeah. And I would also actually add to that for somebody who's been in recovery from, say, anorexia nervosa, who has a body that where eating becomes harder when it drops below a certain maybe set
Mm-hmm.
point,
Mm-hmm.
it's something to kind of be aware of. I think particular people have had that experience that their body responds in that way, that when their weight drops below a certain set point, like eating disorder thinking and eating in general becomes much more difficult. It's something that you really have to keep an eye out for the rest of your life, because
Mm-hmm.
you can inadvertently
Mm-hmm.
end up in that situation through
Yeah.
illness or grief or
Yes.
something
Yes.
like that, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a tricky situation that you did not like ask for.
Yeah.
And that's why having a buffer is
Mm-hmm.
it's important
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
bodies respond in that way.
Yeah.
And so, like, what are the three things that you feel could help somebody who's either at that point in their dieting journey where like the body says, no, I can't do this anymore.
Mm.
I'm not doing, I hear this as well from people sometimes when they get on a discovery call. It's like, I just can't do another diet. If I even think about one, I'll start binge eating. Or it's like my body's just, like you described, it's the food becomes available and I feel out of control.
Mm.
And because somebody's just come off a lengthy restriction.
Mm.
Um, like what are something that you feel might be helpful to just even plant a seed of possibility for something different?
Mm. I've got I've got more than three.
Okay.
Well, the first thing is to stop dieting. But I get what you're saying. It's like that person's already reached that point. But then allied to that would be to, and this is not a mind switch that you can just do like that for most people. It's a process that takes time to let go of trying to lose weight in whatever
Mm,
way. So, to sort of let go of the idea, okay, not dieting, but maybe I'll try the intuitive eating diet or the mindful eating diet, but take the word diet out of it, but with the aim of losing weight. Can I try a different way without dieting? So I don't have the backlash. And that is hard work. It really, really is. But it can be done. So that would be a focus for me that I think is central, is to let go of the pursuit of weight loss. And the next thing that I would recommend people do is to work on their attunement. And that is like a spidergram, the word attunement in the middle. And then there's this like lots
hmm
of legs coming off it. Because what sort of attunement? Attunement to your body, what your body needs, how hungry you are, how satisfied you are, when you're getting full. Attunement to, if you're tired, you're thirsty, it's just like awareness of
Yeah.
what is happening here in the present moment. What do I attunement to needs? Like, what do I need? If it's not food, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't eat, but if it isn't food, what might it be that you need? Is it emotional? Is it mental? Is it something else? Relational? You know,
Mm,
um, is it a physical thing? Is just what is it that you need? Um, and then there are two other aspects that I think are really, really crucial. The one is compassion, just being kind to yourself and giving yourself loads of room, because going through, you know, this idea that you're at war with your own body
mm.
is traumatic with a small t,
Yes.
but it is also huge to
Yeah.
not be friends with yourself, to feel self-loathing, to feel self-hate, to feel that you're not good enough, that you're wrong in some way, that you're defective, that you're, I don't even like using the word attractive because that's so socially based and it's very loaded, but that is how people see themselves, you know, as not worthy of love, not worthy of connection, not worthy of, you know, achieving their own goals that they have for themselves or whatever it is. So to have compassion, to cultivate compassion for ourselves. And then probably the last thing, which again is a spidergram, is mindfulness, you know, kind of just awareness, curiosity of what is happening right now. It's like, what is my mind telling me? It's like, is that a path I want to go down? Is that valid? Is that true? Is that helpful? Um, okay, and there's one more, which is patience.
Yeah. That's been my hardest one, I think. There's an ongoing practice for me in my life. I am slightly better than I was when I was 20 something. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, there's so much in that, Vanya. And I think as well that it's a process and it's a practice, and the
Mm-hmm.
patience comes in because this often takes time to do that. And even what you said, like the cultivating attunement and awareness, that in itself, it's a lot of work because often people are very disconnected from their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we've spent a long time going on and off dieting, it takes like we really have to dissociate out of, it takes a lot of work to try to override basic physical needs like hunger and fullness,
Mm-hmm.
particular hunger. And
Yeah.
I keep coming back to this quote. I think somebody posted this in a one of these health at every size Facebook group or something years ago. And I've also seen Judith Matz quoting it slightly different in one of her books, saying that when we deny ourselves food, when we're physically hungry, it's like telling ourselves in real time we're not worthy of care.
Mm.
And it's just so profound. And if you do that over and over and over, you're like subconsciously reinforcing these other messages you might have gotten from other places, that you're not worthy, you're not,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Evelyn Tribole says somewhere, I don't know if it was in a supervision thing or in a book, I really don't remember, but something along the lines of this isn't a problem with weight or even a problem with food. It is more self-care issue. And it envelops so much. It's not
Yes.
just about what we're putting in our mouths and how much and the quality of the food and all of that kind of stuff. It's about taking care of ourselves. And sometimes the best care we can take of ourselves in a particular moment might be, I don't know, a bowl of ice cream or a Snickers bar or something. And we need to stop making that a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing one of my clients said recently as well was, she said, because she's done all of like a lot of this work, and she said, now I feel good in myself. And because I feel good in myself, some of that external stuff matters less. And she said, I even have a better buffer that when I am encountering weight stigma, say in healthcare settings and stuff, I have more, because she's more grounded in herself.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, like, yeah, it's because you know that you matter.
Yeah.
You know that now and believe it. So there
Yeah.
is more space to let that be kind of just outside of oneself. It doesn't have to be internalized anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
that was just wow, like, that it's a I don't know, I sometimes, I mean, you do this work and you do it for years and years, and you sit with lots of people, but I think when you see some of those transformations,
Mm-hmm.
it's still mind blowing. It's like, oh, the amount of possibilities that are available it's magic, really.
It
And
really
make
is. It really is. I've got a client, I don't work with her anymore. Well, on and off occasionally every now and again, but she works in a hospital setting and just the process of all the work that we did together really ignited something in her, which was a passion about making a difference in the healthcare setting. And from being so ashamed of her own body, and you know, went from that into being an advocate for people in the hospital. When she heard other staff criticizing patients' bodies, she called them out, or and wanted to, and I think did actually do some training for staff about size diversity, about inclusivity, about all of that kind of stuff. And it really can stretch into all sorts of areas of life, which is honestly, it gives me goosebumps because it impacts more than one person. It becomes a ripple effect.
Yeah, and I think about that too, in that ripple effect, because you and I as individual practitioners, or every other practitioner in this space doing this work, you're affecting one person at a time, but then there's ripple effects out, like they have, and I think about the generational ripple effect also, like
Absolutely.
when
They have
women,
kids.
they have kids, and you're working with a woman who is in her 40s or 50s, and she might be the first one of a two or three generations of women who decides, I'm not going to diet anymore. And
Hmm.
they have children, they have sisters, they have
Hmm.
nieces, and nephews, even. Like it
Yeah.
ripples out and creates different dynamics in the sort of
Mm.
matrix or the space. And I
Yeah.
think that is also so, so powerful.
Mm.
So, Vanya, this has been a great conversation. I think kind of hoping where it would take us, and hopefully it's been useful for people too.
Mm.
Um, but I always ask people about, what does joyful nourishment mean to them, because that's
Mm.
the title of the podcast.
Mm.
And you kind of said, I'm not sure I'm in a space where like joyful nourishment really resonates, or it's
Mm.
accessible to me right now. So do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, my husband died last year, and it's been 2 years since he got ill. So, yeah, it's been a lot. It's been big transition for me and my kids, um, and it's been a huge adjustment. Um, and yeah, I was just thinking when I saw that, that was a topic you wanted to go to. I just thought, oh, I'm not sure about that one. I can't remember when I last felt joyful. I have snippets, moments. I think probably the time that I feel the closest to that is in nature, when I can hear the birds, when I see like the stream nearby me when it's really full and rushing, and I love the sound of that. I don't know if I'd even call that joy, but it's um, it's probably the time that I feel the most connected to all that's out there. Um, yeah, I think, well, you know that my business is called Peaceful Eating. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's more kind of where I um, like to be. And I think we can be peaceful and joyful at the same time. And we can feel at peace and feel grief at the same time.
Yeah.
It's not exclusive to just being on its own emotion. Um, but for me, it feels like a more attainable um, place to locate myself, I think. But but having thought about it since you put that, since you sent me that, I think we can probably put a lot of pressure on ourselves about being somewhere we're not, like
Mm.
aiming to be joyful. It can feel like pressure. And
Yeah.
so I think for me, it's more being awake to when joy is here, or the potential for joy, that I can open myself up to it, rather than it's something I need to go out and do or create or be
Yeah.
active in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think about it for myself that these are the things that helps me, like nourish me. So
Mm-hmm.
these are the things that can support me so that my cup is full,
Mm-hmm.
um, that I have that sort of grows my capacity to deal with the things in life that are
Mm-hmm.
difficult,
Mm-hmm.
because there are things that are really difficult and
They really are.
situations
Mm-hmm.
that happens that you never asked for and that you're thrown in and that you have to deal with and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's that sort of, for me, I think that joyful nourishment is the sense of what are the things that replenish me
Mm-hmm.
in ways that so yeah, but I really appreciate your perspective, because it's that sense of, oh, what do I, because that ties in with this sort of capitalist productivity culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, what do I need to do to feel this way? Whereas I
Yeah.
suppose that was not my intention. It's like, what are the things that we do that is nourishing and replenishing and
Mm.
coming from that sense of self, like deep self-care, like the honest, genuine kind of self-care beyond the bubble baths and
Yeah.
the
Okay. Well, I'll give you a very practical example. I've got a really busy day today, and I'll only be home at 6 o'clock. So what I've already done is prepare dinner. It's in the oven with the timer on, so that I know that when I get home, there will be a fresh, nourishing, satisfying dinner where I'm already hungry, and I, you know, it'll be done. So my future self this morning at 7 o'clock was, or my present self was thinking about my future self at 7 o'clock tonight, and what will I need at that time to nourish myself, to support myself? Because I don't want to be scrambling around and being in that kind of frantic, hungry state. So sometimes it's preparation and planning and making sure I've got what we need in the fridge, or what I need in the fridge, or the cupboards, or whatever. Um, so getting enough rest,
Yeah.
just moving in ways that feel good to me. Um, and gosh, I tell you what, laughing. I have got to laugh. I really, really do. I listen to satire, political satire particularly, because that's the only way I can really process any news, is if it's made completely ridiculous and funny, because it is ridiculous. It really is. The
Yeah.
whole thing of the whole world is,
Yeah, you got to laugh about it, because otherwise you have to cry. And yeah, yes. So yeah, that's a good perspective. So it's like, what are the things that we can do to take care of ourselves to meet those needs, and that we talked about. And dieting, coming circling back to close the conversation, is like dieting can seem like a way of doing that, but it's only really very superficial, and it's sort of, or it's illusionary, maybe is a better description. It comes in, and again, we're sold on this idea that this is what we're supposed to do to take care of our health. So when we actually park that, or we can let go of that, we can start really exploring
Mhm.
harder
We
the
can do
things.
things that are actually sustainable. Dieting isn't.
Yeah,
And we can do
which
things that don't have negative consequences for us, which dieting does.
yeah, which is the other thing, that's the piece of the message that are not in the marketing for dieting. So that, yes, underneath it all, it isn't sustainable and it's not helpful, and it does have real negative consequences also.
Mm.
So so thank you so much, Vanya. It's been wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
where can people find you if they're interested in working with you or checking out your work? And I know you
Hmm.
have a website, because you've been writing blogs for many years and lots of juicy information on your website. So where can people find you?
www.peacefuleating.co.uk. That's where everything is. It's the best place to go if you want to get more more information.
Brilliant. Thanks so
Thanks
much.
so much, Lynn.
Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.